Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Manthan on the amendments to the IT rules. My name is Amrita Chaudhary, and on behalf of CCAOI, we welcome you to this discussion. And this session is being live streamed and recorded. By way of introduction, CCAOI is a trust, and we are engaged in capacity building, research, and advocacy on internet and digital policies in India for nearly 2 decades. As you know, that MeitY has proposed amendments to the IT rules, and they have expanded the obligations for intermediaries and users. And today's discussion is designated to these provisions so that they are more understandable. People can share their view on the India's regulatory needs and encourage you all to make your submissions. And we would also prepare a report with the key takeaways and suggestions and share it with all of you in the community and even with MeitY with our submission. And today we have a privilege to have a distinguished panel of diverse speakers coming from diverse stakeholder groups. We have Deepa Ojha from DSCI. We have Saikat Datta from Deepstrat, Vartika Mishra from NASCOM, Snehashish Ghosh from Techniti, and Rajneel Kamath from the Trusted Information Alliance. But to begin with, we will have Shraddhanjali Sharma from our team who will provide an update on the amendments. And Swati would be pasting the agenda on the chat. And she would be moderating the chat. If you have any questions or queries, for a question, you can use the prefix question, or for comment, a prefix comment. And during open house, you may raise your hand, share your thoughts or queries. Do remember to mention your name and affiliation while doing so. And many a times, your queries may also be addressed by the speakers over chat. And we encourage you to actively participate in this discussion, but also request that you remain respectful and courteous. If you are not speaking, please mute your microphones. And since we have a tight schedule, even the esteemed speakers have been given a time limit. And with that, I would hand it over to my colleague Shraddhanjali to share a brief overview on what are the amendments the government has proposed. Shraddhanjali, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Amrita. Just give me one moment, I'll share my screen. Yeah, it's visible?
It is.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Shraddhanjali, and I'll be giving a very brief overview of the changes. I won't take much time. So the first change, like as we all know, this came up on 30th March, and the timeline to reply and the timeline to give feedback is till 7th May 2026. So the first change that we see is the insertion of Rule 3.4, where we talk about the advisories. We talk about advisories, the SOPs, the guidelines. These all intermediaries have to comply with any advisory guidelines and SOPs that come from the ministry. So this has added another layer of compliance, and the impact of this, in the sense that what happens to intermediaries if they don't comply with this, is that it jeopardizes their safe harbor protection under Section 79. So this is one of the change. The second is Rule 31G and 31H, where the data retention obligations have been expanded. So you do have the data retention obligations under the IT Act, but here it also says that parallelly you also have to follow other statutes. So basically they are having a layered approach towards compliance. And then the third is the MIB, where the oversight framework has been expanded. The MIB no longer says that we will expand our oversight mechanism only to intermediaries, but we are expanding it to content creators, the individuals who post content online in terms of news and publishes current affairs. So that is the third, that is Rule 8.1 proviso. Then we have Rule 14.2 and Rule 14.5, that is the expanded IDCE jurisdiction. So we have the interdepartmental committee. So now the term complaint has been replaced with the term matters, which basically means that anything and everything can be examined and can be referred by the ministry. So you don't need a formal complaint trigger or a grievance trigger to for this IDC jurisdiction. It can be for any matter. Then the fifth is the recent one, which is the mandatory AI content labeling. So any AI generated content, you need to have the label. So basically a continuous and a clearly visible label for the entire duration. This is not just a one-time disclosure. So it applies to all users and the platforms. And the reason behind this is basically to combat the deepfakes and misinformation. So these are the five changes that has come by, and we will be discussing these five changes and the impact that it has. So we had the date for feedback on 14 April, which has been now extended to 7 May 2026. Yeah, I think with this, I'll hand it over to Amrita.
Thanks so much, Shraddhanjali. And without wasting much time, perhaps I will go to our esteemed speakers, and you have 4 minutes to respond to these questions. If we have anything else and we have time left, we'll come back. So my first question to you, all of you, is, in your view, what are the key concerns or challenges that these proposed amendments make, and that need closer attention from your perspective? And I think Vartika would be going first. So Vartika, over to you.
Thank you, Amrita. I think, first of all, very important discussion, extremely timely, because we all know the implications that these amendments are going to have. Uh, However, let me begin by saying that we are not doubting the intention of the government. I'm sure, it is very clear that, they need more clarity, and, they need to reach out to the user or whatever. However, as an industry, there are problems which are manifold. The intention for the industry, I think, is also the same. Everybody wants to strengthen accountability and, improve implementation. But the problem is the manner in which it can be done, the manner in which it is being proposed. So we feel, there are a lot of duplications, there's a lot of ambiguity, and there's actually a lot of confusion regarding all these obligations that have been proposed. The focus has to be, one, applicability, and the other is also, in terms of implementation. So just a few broad concerns, and I'm going to focus primarily on 3, 4 of the amendments. So, obviously there is a need, first of all, to ensure that any new compliance obligation that is, being introduced, it remains anchored in the statutory framework under the IT Act, right? Especially and particularly in this case, in the context of Section 79, which talks of safe harbor. Second broad consideration, as the regulatory framework is evolving, and I'm sure, it will go on to evolve, there is a very important need to maintain a clear distinction between binding legal requirements and the non-binding requirements, which could be, advisory in nature or maybe facilitative in nature. I think that is very, very important from a long-term perspective of consistency and predictability. And the third point, obviously, for the government, not a major one, but very, very important for the industry. If the government keeps coming up with these, amendments and regulations on a very, very regular basis, how do you plan your system? How do you design? How do you cater to such large volumes of, user-generated content in real time? So just going specifically into 3, 4, where, they've said that with a very sweeping statement saying that there's a requirement for intermediaries to comply with all kinds of instruments, whether it is advisory, whether it is guideline, SOP, orders, code of practice, and so on and so forth. Now, the primary concern is how many of these are actually defined as, as a legal instrument within the IT Act. While some are, guideline is, order, we all know, but can an advisory, or can a SOP become legally binding for anybody? Not, I mean, and not just in the context of, the intermediaries or these stakeholders. Even if you look at a broader spectrum, outside the IT Act, outside, MeitY's jurisdiction, can any government come out, with the advisory and say that this will be legally binding? So there's a bigger question of, what constitutes, what these instruments actually mean. What does an advisory mean? What does the order mean? What does the direction actually mean? From that perspective, I think there's a lot of ambiguity, and from there, what flows is, a huge surge of obligations, which I feel, some of them are not under, the jurisdiction of the intermediaries. Some are not even under the control of the intermediaries. And the expectation is that, people will go ahead and start complying with it. I think that is where the main problem, appears. So, how does an intermediary actually determine that this is something that is binding on me and I have to comply, and this is something that I can just, keep it as an advisory and not really, go ahead and, or maybe comply to a level to which I can. Moreover, when I talked about duplication, so if you see Rule 3.1 already laid down detailed due diligence obligations. It also talked about, violation of any law in force, etc. So what we're not able to understand is what is the new need of duplicating this due diligence requirement in 3.4c now? What is the point of doing it when 3.1 is already extremely comprehensive? Similarly, if you see 8.1, now intermediaries have been included. We had a meeting with, MeitY, and all of us were there in some of the other meeting where it was clarified that the intent of including is only to get user information. There's no other. However, the wording still remains that, all the obligations of the publishers kind of fall on the intermediaries. But to go ahead with what the MeitY secretary clarified, we'll say fine. It was to get to a user. But again, 3.1J already has the requirement for intermediaries to provide all kind of information within, stipulated time, that is 72 hours. Then the intent behind is actually not clear. So, from our side, obviously, we're going to raise all this to MeitY, and we're going to tell them to uh, one, clarify what these instruments mean and what is the intent of including everything, that this should not be done. The other, try and remove all the duplications that are there. So with that, Amrita, I will just take a pause, and maybe once you come back to me, we'll talk
Right.
about how we want to go ahead with these.
Right. Thanks so much. And thanks for sharing your perspective. I think I will next go to Saikat. Saikat, if you would wish to come in now and share your views, and please feel free to contradict each other, compliment, or question each other also. Let's have a healthy discussion.
Right. Thank you so much, Amrita. I'll, with this kind of a distinguished panel, I think most of us will agree on the problems that the draft actually suggests. I'll try to do a little bit of reverse engineering and try to give you some scenarios. So just bear with me when I'll give you one scenario. For example, you've seen what the war in West Asia was happening, the Americans and the Israelis versus the Iranians. And you start looking at, the narrative that obviously starts between both the adversaries. So there is the Iranian narrative that is going out, and then there is, of course, the American and the Israeli narrative, and these narratives are competing. Now, I mean, if we were to take a quick poll and say whose narrative did very well, most people would probably say, oh, the Iranians have done really well. And you start seeing a lot of amplification of their narrative, because you're getting to see them talking about, the Lego movies that are coming out, the memes that are coming out, etc. Now, you may wonder, what has this got to do with the IT rules? I'll take us back to Operation Sindoor, which happened last year. Militarily, it was tactically and strategically a great success. And yet, what you get to hear is the narrative war doesn't seem to be in our favor. Now, you come back to what one of these rules and regulations are suggesting is that we need to know who is the creator. We need to understand, if they publish such and such, will this be considered current affairs? Will this be current news, etc.? You take it back to, creativity, etc., or these kind of successes that we have seen Iran do comes when there is less worry about regulation, there is less worry about the consequences, and your creative freedom allows you to come up with new ideas, etc. The problem that here is that when you start over regulating, everybody will become careful. So if you look at it from a national perspective, there are a lot of people who could have become great spokesperson for our national interests, our requirements, etc., you're actually shutting down a whole lot of them. When you do that with this kind of regulation, then you have a major problem on your hands. So now, similarly, as Vartika has already covered some of this, advisories, for example, in Indian law, can advisories be binding? Because once you give out an advisory, what is the legal statute? What is the judicial precedence about some of this? None of that is there. And we have always believed that subordinate legislation will always mean something that the executive has created after they have been empowered to do, in this case, Section 87 of the IT Act and so on and so forth. So you're also creating a constitutional problem here. Now, when you do lawmaking like this, it has a major impact not only on our industry, our creativity, our innovation, and so on and so forth. Even investors wanting to come into India as one of the biggest markets, viable, a great place to work in, they'll start questioning that what are the risks am I ready to take? So whether it is from a national perspective, which I gave earlier, from a creativity perspective, etc., what happens to your narrative when you need it, what kind of people, etc., that's one aspect. The second aspect is that if you start rule making where suddenly one advisory come, and you see the problem with advisories is you may give out one and then withdraw it within days. What are you telling, people who would want to invest and grow in India, etc.? I'll give you another perspective. I was involved with an application and a platform that was created, which was similar to Coup, but also different in many ways. And a lot of investors had a lot of hope. And even the government had said that, we need to have a platform our own. At that time, Twitter was going through a lot of things and was converting to X, Facebook, etc. That India, with its talent, with its size, with its users, should have a platform of its own. Now, today, both these platforms have shut down. A, because they were always worried about regulation, they were always worried about compliance, etc. So if you were to see the journey of big tech companies, whether it is Meta, Google, etc., they had a lot of support from their home governments to grow and then spread out to the other countries globally, give services, innovate, etc. Here, if our so-called platforms and innovations, which are completely Indian based, Indian designed, Indian created, with these kind of regulations, will they be able to succeed? And the last point that I want to make here is that, you also have these vague definitions of who deals with current affairs, who deals with other kinds of content. Here, the problem is, let's say we are a think tank and we want to publish a paper which does a deep research into something which is very, very current. How will one government look at it, and how will, with the same powers, a government of which comes subsequently look at the same paper? Again, ideological differences may make the same paper look very good to one government and very hostile to the other. It just makes us worried. So you will, in a way, start putting fetters not only on creativity, freedom of speech, innovation, investment, but also on your critical thinking. And when you do that, I think you're looking at a very real danger. So these are some of the major aspects which worry me, and we can get into more details about it when I'm needed to come back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saket. And perhaps with this, may I call in Rajnil to speak? I know you would want to speak only on the content part. Rajnil, what are your thoughts?
Hi, Mita, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. Uh, I think we've seen a lot of developments when it comes to IT rule amendments. And in many ways, it feels like certain political challenges are trying to be addressed through policy mechanisms and therefore bring certain, what I would say, decorum in the space, right? I largely want to speak about some of the work that we do. So the Trusted Information Alliance, as you know, is a coalition of fact-checking, media, and civic tech organizations. And we run something called the Deepfakes Analysis Unit. So it's a team that's consistently working on AI-generated content, specifically those that are harmful and misleading. So from one perspective, though, we're happy that the issue of deepfakes is something that is being looked at. However, I feel the way it's being addressed is concerning. When the minister was asked why there are so many takedowns, the response to that is because there were many deepfakes. I think this word deepfakes in many ways now is being used as a blanket term to describe any content that is not considered to be, what's the right word? Any content that you don't like is now called a deepfake, and that becomes a pretext for being taken down. We did see the definition of deepfakes, so the amendments came up. I think they were notified on February 20th. I'm yet to see any kind of implementation happen, whether on the platform side or any enforcement from the government side. And I think even though the IT secretary said, no, you know what, we had enough of notice when the rules came out last year. Now we've notified it. It has to be in effect. There are certain technical challenges that have not been taken into consideration when you think of labeling, for example. I just want to quickly highlight one aspect of the definition and come to it. And the way SGI has been defined, it says that such information appears to be real, authentic, or true, and depicts or portrays any individual or event in this manner that is or is likely to be perceived as indistinguishable from a natural person or a real world event. The question is, who is going to be the judge of this? Because this is very, very subjective and context driven. An example that I can take to tell you why it's subjective or context driven is when we look at the category of satire. Somebody may make a video with the objective of it being satire. And it may reference to real world events. It may reference to, a whole bunch of things. It happens even in Bollywood movies. It doesn't necessarily only have to be satire. The person who made it knows it's satire. Somebody who watches it, knowing who created it, will know that it's satire. But when the sharing of that piece of content happens, the line from satire to somebody believing it's true actually gets very blurred. And therefore, when you go down the chain of, say, the fourth person or fifth person sharing it, may lose context of it being satire and think it's actually true. So in the very first instance, a person who is making this content might believe that, okay, it's AI. But as it goes down the chain, people may believe and say, no, it's true, it really happened. Or the ulta can also happen, right? This is something, platforms have consistently said that they're not the arbiters of truth. So then who gets to decide this? I think this is one question. The second thing is the rules are already in place, and you have said that there needs to be labeling. And now again, there's an amendment on that, which says that for any visible portion, you got to have a continuous label. Now, visible portion having continuous labels is great, but many people forget that we are a very deeply rooted one-on-one messaging country. And one of the things that goes on inside messaging apps are audio notes, right? Everybody's heard of Dr. Devi Shetty giving you some prescription on how you can cure your heart problems or stuff like that, only for him to come out and say, that's not me, right? Now, in case there is AI involved in that, how are you going to ensure that that audio note, like current amendment says, you need to have a note in the beginning which says that this is synthetically generated. In the case of audio, that doesn't necessarily hold. We've already seen that a C2PA standard already exists, but the applicability of it across platforms is inconsistent. So while certain generators of synthetic generated information might be able to add the metadata, depending on how that metadata is then uploaded to different platforms for distribution, the metadata may either be there or not be there. It differs from are you uploading from a desktop or are you uploading from a mobile phone? It differs from platform A to platform B. So something created, let's say by Meta AI, by the time you upload to YouTube, a lot of that metadata is gone. So is there a common standard by which this can be done? There are many permutations and combinations which still remain addressed. I'll give you an example of that as well. When we think of AI avatars today, we see many creators who are actually not speaking themselves, but they are using AI avatars. What you see is a combination of piece to camera, which is the AI avatar, followed by a lot of B-roll. When I mean B-roll, it means clips from different. Oh, sorry, am I still there?
You are there, but you'll have to.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know. Suddenly, yeah, anyway. So you now have such kinds of videos that are already happening. The rules are in force, but I don't see creators adding the AI label anywhere, and I don't see platforms doing it either. So, what use are these rules really if you're not even looking at enforcement? I don't think the government is looking at it from that perspective. Ultimately, enforcement will boil down to when we don't like something, we will decide that there are rules and we will take that person to task accordingly, person on the platform. As Saikat mentioned, we've seen a lot of issues, especially coming out of the Iran war, where a lot of AI content is being used. In this situation, it's not necessarily only from the sides in this conflict, but across many other countries. Some of the observations which I can share, we're actually putting a report on this, and I can share some of the observations that we are seeing. AI on synthetically generated media is now a weapon. In a geopolitical war, it's a weapon. It can really help you tip the scales or make you believe things that may or may not have happened. That's one. Countries which, I mean, we call it neutral countries, tend to be targeted. Anybody who says we are strategic in our relationships and we will be friends with all, we will invariably see them being targeted. And this is something we saw during Operation Sindoor as well. If X was banned in Pakistan, when Operation Sindoor happened, X was unbanned. And suddenly you had a lot of handles putting out a lot of information. And to this date, we will still see a lot of synthetically generated information about some of our politicians. More importantly, our military generals saying certain things which they have not said. So we definitely see it being used as a weapon in that sense. Detection is like an arms race, and the tools are unable to keep up with the rapid advancements in the rapid advancements in generation of these. Earlier, it was easier to say, okay, if it has 6 fingers, you can say it's AI. That's not the case anymore. To be able to detect is extremely hard. A lot of detection tools were based on identifying people, right? When you have a conflict, you're looking at blasts, you're looking at fires, you're looking at some other elements, which the tools tend to fail when it comes to these specific aspects. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's very hard to look at how these rules are going to be enforced. You need more consensus among platforms to come up with certain common terminologies for what it is, right? Some people may say, oh, this is an audio clone. Some people will say, oh, this is a deep fake. Some people will say, this is a likeness. If the same video is going to be described in 3 different ways, the enforcement in it can be very, very different. So there needs to be commonly accepted taxonomies, which even the government might want to consider, because that also will inform any further policy making and regulation that they may want to do. We've made it seem like SGI or anything that's synthetically generated is a deepfake and therefore bad. That's not necessarily the case. So even a clear definition of a deepfake needs to
So
be there.
Rajnil, I'll
Because,
come back to you on this solution part
yeah,
at the end. I'll just bring in Deepa, if that's okay. To share her initial thoughts on the issues. Deepa, over.
Thank you, Amrita, for having me here, and thank you to all my previous speakers to basically share my thoughts already. So, if I just have to name out, Vartika has already shared what are the larger concerns are, right, when it comes to this IT Act amendments. That there is a kind of intention. We know it's good to ensure platform accountability, transparency, right? But the way it is kind of coming out and through the letters, it's a bit ambiguous, right? Second, I want to thank you for bringing in the perspective, different perspective or narratives that we can have out from this conversation. And Rajnil, of course, for justifying that why government is doing it the way certain is doing it the certain way, right? All these sort of concerns that we have highlighted. So not like much to add to what Vartika and my previous speakers have already said. But one thing that I want to bring in, okay, like in the Shraddhanjali shared it, 2 things that I can certainly highlight. When it comes to SOP advisories, Vadika is very right that these are not defined in the letters of the law. And over-regulation, as Saket stated, it's a problem that we might kill our own country's creativity when it comes to new item, leave aside constitutional element of freedom of speech and expressions. That is something else, but we are killing on innovation part of it, right, through over-regulation. But when it comes to SOP advisories, guidelines, I think there should be a tiered approach. Right now, whatever format it is being written, right, it is looks like everything is applicable on everybody. But I'm really hopeful that government is not envisaging it in that manner. The answer could be like something is applicable in some sort of entity and something is applicable in others. So I think no one size fits all approach should be actually considered when it comes to the letters of the law. Second, what we want to do, right? Like ensure platform accountability. Coming from DSCI, one thing I'm very certain of that we should strive for some technology way of doing certain things. Over regulations might not be a problem. Over regulations might not be a solution, right? And especially when Vartika already highlighted that these are kind of duplication that we are already doing. And in order to protect my safe harbor, companies will stop investing to India. So we also have to take into account our macroeconomic goals of ease of doing business, increasing investments in India, having more sort of data centers in the country, right? So I think this linear approach of regulating platforms and ensuring user accountability altogether should not be considered as the right approach. We have to have a like macroeconomic sense of things. And when it comes to trust, privacy, security, of course, elements like cybersecurity should be prioritized because with the new developments happening happening all around the world, you must have heard about mythos and the capabilities that it can bring into the table, right? I think our approach should get nuanced. Like regulation is not the solution. And as a tech policy folks, we know technology always outpaces regulation, and consultation is the need of the hour. And when people are questioning constitutionality, let's be very honest about it. The original rules which came out in 2018, I am not sure that if it was laid down in the parliament. So I am not raising even questions on the constitutionality because there is an urgency that all of us see, right? So from that perspective, we have to like adopt practical approaches, especially data retention provision, right? There's a clarity that you have to comply with this regulation, but you also have to comply with the others regulation that are in place. If I just have to take DPDP into account, DPDP says as soon as my purpose is solved, you have to delete my data unless legally required. Now, IT Act itself being a horizontal law, which law will apply, right? There are certain regulations which are already in place, which talks about 1 year of retention timeline. So clarity, I think Vartika was very right when she said clarity on certain aspects. That what sort of data needs to be retained? Is it for investigation purpose or it is for pro proactive kind of element purpose? Now, another question that I see or a thing that I see impact you and I as a user is the overarching power of interdepartmental committee, right? Right now, any matter can be referred from government and IDC can take cognizance of it. And my two questions here from the government, maybe or to the audience in the panel out here is, what is the legal status of the orders coming out of those any matters references, right? Is it a law? Is it an SOP, right? Second thing, what are my two previous level of hierarchy of complaints? Previously, IDC was the third layer of grievances redressal, right? First it was platform resolution, then GAC, then third level. So how do we define that from a user perspective? And what does this any matter kind of constitute? Because that's where I think Saket's point of narrative or the Rajni's point of ensuring that deepfakes are not causing harm to individuals comes into picture, right? So some scope of clarity of scope with regard to any matter, which ministry can refer to it. And of course, creativity is certain question. You and I both share news, right? Like, in fact, this webinar itself, we publicized it at many places. So would we be more careful sharing this going forward because it's sort of a news content or some sort of so clarity like who is a publisher versus a non-publisher, and maybe some sort of synergies between copyright law would also be required here because publisher in terms of copyright act and publisher in terms of IT act may create some sort of ambiguities there. So I think need of the hour is of course, Amrita, that we find technology ways to solve technology related problems, not legal ways to regulate those problems. And last point that I want to bring in, okay, working in tech policy area. In fact, these two amendments that came one after another, right? We are able to take count on that only when we are vigilant about certain things. We take a closer look at IT rules. But considering SOPs, advisories, orders, are we going to have a repository of such sort of advisories coming into picture? How do I keep a track as a platform or a news content creator that these are the regulations in place? And Saket was very right. Something might come in today and might be withdrawn the next day. How do I plan my systems? Right. So from that perspective, I think I'll go back to Vartika's point. Intention is good, implementation and of without striking any defect on innovation should be looked at this point in time. That you never know. Intention is very good. I agree to that. That MeitY is doing a great job out there. But how do we practically implement as the need of the hour? So I think I'll stop my interventions here, and only one liner sentence if I have to make is like technology ways to find solutions to these problems is the only solution. Yes, I'll stop here.
Thanks so much, Deepa. That was as in yes, I think there's this clarity which everyone is seeking at every level, and I think when we talk about the IT rules, we only think of the big tech. We are not talking about the smaller entities. Like CCAOI has the newsletter going out every month. What happens to that? But let's go to Snehashish, who's seen it from both sides. Snehashish, your take on the amendments.
Thank you, Amrita, and thank you for organizing this. This is very timely and helpful. I'll try to sort of talk about 3.4 per se, and try to do a bit of analysis in terms of what's happening with 3.4. So if you see in terms of advisories, the one place you will actually see the word advisory and guidelines in the IT Act is Section 70B, which constitutes the CERT, the iCERT as we know it. And if you go back 4 days back after Mythos and the Mythos leak, CERT actually put out an advisory which was on defending against frontier AI driven cyber risks. And it was an advisory where it told people, beware of these problems. You can be zero trust network principles should apply, and it listed down a bunch of best practices, so on and so forth. So in the universe of MeitY and the universe of and hoping that CERT is a subset of MeitY, advisory has a particular meaning per se, and CERT puts out advisory on a regular basis, and which is non-binding in nature, right? But it also has the role of informing public. Now coming to the particular amendment which has been proposed, which has used a broad range of words, right? It starts from standard operating procedure to code of practice to orders to directions. So it's quite all encompassing. And to sort of go to the root of this problem, one needs to actually think through what actually MeitY is trying to solve for. And just to quote my previous speaker, Deepa, who was talking about one size doesn't fit all, or tech will always outpace regulation. MeitY is trying to find a tool which can help them to solve for problems which are quite urgent and imminent, and moving at a very fast pace. And over there, while we know that self-regulation has its limitations, one needs to think through whether co-regulation is a way to go forward. And co-regulation is something where the government lays down the foundational principles and says that do XYZ. These are the principles, and you have to comply within these boundaries. And then you actually sit down with each intermediary and figure it out. And why do I say so? And just to give an example of one size doesn't fit all, an intermediary like YouTube versus a telecom operator versus a cloud service provider versus an end-to-end encrypted peer-to-peer messaging service are totally different platforms with totally different requirements. And that's why one side doesn't fit all. And in those circumstances, there is a need to build a solution which is agile and at the same time cuts across and cuts through the implementation problem, which Rajneel was talking about, right? Like when we are thinking of certain rules which have been put out on, let's say, synthetically generated information, then whether it is implementable or not. Like, yes, it might be implemented on a platform which has prominent services in India, but if you are taking about, if I deploy DeepSeek V4 Pro on my laptop or on whatever system I have and just start generating AI generated content and put it out without any label, I don't think there is any obligation on DeepSeek to put any kind of label on that particular piece of content or on me per se, or it could be on me, but it's very hard to implement in any way or form. So again, going back to previous the point that while the intent is there to figure out what advisories should be binding or what SOPs should be binding, or what code of practice, or the interesting word was code of practice, should be binding or not. I think it's important for MeitY and the government to sit down with particular intermediaries and solve for these issues based on a particular foundational principle or a mechanism, and it should be put out for scrutiny as well. So public and civil society organizations should be able to test these code of practice or SOPs against the foundational principles which exist in law as we speak. Back to you, Amrita. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Snehashish. There was this discussion happening, and one of the things was, what is the accountability? What is the transparency? I think one of our speakers mentioned that there are many takedowns which happens when many people do not come to know. Similarly, say, for example, a user's content is taken down. How do I go and get recourse? I don't think those are also being discussed, because, the rules are being made to protect users at the end of the day. But are those questions which are essential to be thought? Perhaps, what we would do is, in case any of you think there is something else, some other issue which is important, which you missed sharing, you can quickly share it in 1 minute or so, or else we will go to the next part of the question, which would be your suggestions or recommendations on what you want to put to address these issues, or any particular wording or language you would suggest changing in these, or even text removal, addition, etc. Does anyone have any other issue to add? Else we'll go to the next part of the question, is your suggestions and recommendations. Okay, let's go to I'll go to Rajnil first, because I know he would be moving from 5 o'clock. So Rajnil, over to you first. What is the suggestions or recommendations you will have, especially on the content part of it?
Yeah, thanks, Amrita. I already did mention some. I'll start again. So I think first, of course, is having clear taxonomies when it comes to SGI. It's very important, because the permutations and combinations we're going to find at a practical level is going to be immense. So having that is something that's going to be really useful. That's number one. Number two is we do have C2PA, but also defining a technical framework for what's acceptable is something that needs to be there. Right now, when the guidelines say, okay, you will have metadata, it doesn't mention anything specifically beyond that. So some kind of guideline over there, along with an SOP or procedure, that can be there even for intermediaries. I think that is going to be really useful. I think we also need to, very frankly, stop using deepfakes as the bugbear for trying to block content. I do recognize that deepfakes might be used for CSAM or NCIR, and there will be ways to deal with it. But AI content today is enabling a lot of creativity, and we need to take that into consideration as well. So when I talk of creative videos, for example, using avatars, even B-rolls today are being made using AI. But what do you go about labeling, right? It's not necessarily harmful. It's not misleading. Do you have to label it? Should you label it? How do you label it? And then to have the burden on platforms to go check whether the disclosure made by the creator is there or not. How are you supposed to do that? Because that technology is not foolproof at all. So at least having some kind of realistic assessment of what is possible today and what's not, and focused more on the harm or the ability to mislead and genuinely mislead, rather than having this blanket rule, which would automatically make people decide, okay, I'm not sure if I can put this up on. Today, as creators, many people are not sure what to do, what not to do. So that is something I think definitely needs to be done. I know that now the government wants to work through saying, okay, advisories can become rules. So maybe some more clarity around this would be really, really useful.
Thank you, Rajnil. I had a question, Rajnil. For example, with people with disabilities, especially visual disabilities, etc., would a label work? Or how does it work for them?
I'm not an expert on this subject, but if you're looking at people with visual disabilities, anything that needs them to see a screen may not be possible. So you may still need audio reinforcement, which I think is primarily the way in which they interact with technology in many ways. Now, that audio reinforcement could happen if you're looking at audio specifically. But what happens when you're looking at video, for example? Then again, like the same way creators do hashtag ad, even on a sponsored post, really small, put in a position where most likely the platform's own UI will cover it up. That's what will more often end up happening, right? If I'm a reel creator today, within the confines of my reel, I know exactly where Instagram will show my display photo. So what I will do is I'll put the hashtag ad at exactly that small circle. So when anybody watches it, the hashtag ad is behind it. Technically, you can't fault me for saying it's not there, but the disclosure is not visible to the public either. You're going to see those kinds of stuff come into AI as well, especially when it comes to the hashtag. I mean, what is it that you're supposed to say? Just is hashtag AI enough, or saying this is made using AI is enough? What is the size? Even if it needs to be prominently visible, I can say it's prominently visible in my video hidden by something else. So some good guideline around that also would be very, very useful.
Right. Thank you so much. That is really helpful. With this, perhaps I'll go to Saikat.
Yeah. So I think Rajneel said this, that or maybe he probably hinted at this, if I heard him correctly, is that what is the problem that the government is hoping to address with these rules? Or I think something to that effect is what he said. And that's a very interesting way to actually approach this, that do we really know and understand what is the problem that the government is trying to fix? And then looking at whatever has been suggested, do these really solve any of the problems that the government is hoping to address? So let us look at, for example, a lot of this will be traced back to 19.2 of the Constitution, which we call reasonable restrictions. And therefore, we will say one of them, for example, would be that should not hurt India's friendly relations with others. So keeping that in mind, let us say we start blocking a whole lot of X handles and Facebook pages, etc., which in our estimate is hurting India's foreign relations with X, Y, and Z. What is happening today is that you may block them, but they are blocked only within Indian jurisdiction. So they are continuing, and the globe is getting to see them. So as a result, they continue to hurt India's relations and foreign relations, because now on the other side, Indian voices, which could have been heard and through creativity, through innovation, etc., they are getting blocked out. As a result, today you are actually seeing a major upsurge in accounts and narrative, and very creative and very articulate narrative, which are inimical to India's interests and are coming from our traditional adversaries. So once again, are we solving the problems that we are looking at? Second is that how do you fix some of these issues? See, innovation, investment, and to some extent, creativity. These are a marathon race. These are not short burst sprints. Now, if somebody is running a marathon, do you want to continue putting more and more hurdles in that marathon? That person will finally tire out and say, I don't want to run this race. I rather go run the race somewhere else. As a result, you will be creating more and more hurdles in the name of over-regulation, A, without fixing the problem, but creating the creativity, the innovation, the technical expertise, the money, etc., that we actually have, and we will see a whole lot of migration out from where we stand today. The next thing is, how do you fix this problem, therefore, from a policy making? I mean, we've had a lot of discussions about stakeholder consultations, etc. I mean, I say this half jokingly, but if I was in the government, I would say, call out everybody who we don't like for a closed door session. People we don't like will probably come up with the best inputs that we can use before we talk to the people we actually like, because a lot of those people will probably tell you the truth. Now, I remember a Boston Consulting report that had come out about the content creation economy, which said that it has a potential to go up to some crazy numbers. It was, I think, in billions or something. Now, that is a fact of life. The economy being what it is, internet-based economies and globalized economies, and you look at everything the way the global order is, that's where the money is. If we start now going after people who will do wealth creation and who are going to innovate and come up with, even if it's just something as simple as content creation, by saying, oh, you are doing current affairs, so we don't like you, so I'm going to shut you down, you're actually hurting the bottom line and the top line of people who could have used it, besides the other things of narrative, etc., actually earn money and foreign exchange for India. So when we keep talking about some of these solutions, etc., we need to really reverse engineer, redraw how we are approaching some of this. And also this constant like data retention in one and data erasure in another. Who's going to do these balance? And if somebody were to say, oh, I could get into jail for following Y, somebody says, but you could also go into jail for following X. So now which of the laws should I follow, and which will shut down my business and shut down all my investments overnight? This way has potential to cause serious harm. And I don't think it's in India's interests and its global ambitions and digital India to go anywhere near the way we are approaching this. Thank you.
Thanks, Saket. I do see Rajneel's hand. So Rajneel, quickly, if you want to make your intervention.
Yeah. So just adding to Shaikat's point, one of the things that happened during Operation Sindoor is if you take TikTok as a platform, now everybody knows that TikTok is banned in India, but in a neighboring country it isn't. So if you take Operation Sindoor as an example, you'll see a lot of content regarding it, but coming from only one country. So if India has a counter view, it's not going to be there in any form or manner. So it does not serve India's interests, assuming that India wants to put out its version of the story as well. And then again, when you block a lot of this content, it's only being blocked in India. It doesn't mean it's being blocked globally in any form or manner. So people outside the country can still see it. I still think that's a smaller fraction of content that's emanating in India and then blocked in India and globally, so that Indians can't see it. And there is a problem there.
Can I
Thanks
just
so
add one quick thing,
Yeah.
Amrit? My last line is that let's say I want to counter a lot of this that is happening on various platforms from our adversarial countries. I am in a situation where I can't even see what they are doing. And so, as Rajni pointed out, they are doing it on platforms which are hugely influential and actually shaping global opinion. I want to counter it, but I don't even know what I have to counter.
Right. Thanks. With this, perhaps I will go to Deepa first, then Vartika, and then Snehashish.
Thank you, Amrita. I think I can't agree more than this to Saket, okay? Like, Saket has covered quite well that what I wanted to cover. So we need to know what actually we want to achieve, right? And in the past also we have seen certain regulations, be it the telecom cybersecurity rules, that what we want to address through telecom cybersecurity rules. Are we actually achieving the intent of cybersecurity, or are we trying to curb cyber crimes in a way? So from that perspective, yeah, clarity of intention is number one that we would require. And how do we implement it? As I said in my earlier interventions also. Second thing, taxonomy. Indranil was quite right when he said that there should be taxonomy of SOPs and some hierarchy, right? So, if government is coming out with an SOP lately, because we have seen that how advisories are gradually becoming binding, right? So, some classification between a binding and a non-binding set of things, that if this comes out to you, this is binding, this is not binding, should be second approach when it comes to uh, strengthening this IT rules amendment and the desired objectives out of it. Third, of course, regulatory harmonization. That's the need of the hour, right? So we should see like what I'm trying to address through data retention provisions. Just for taking an example, is it getting addressed to DPDPA? If not DPDPA, is certain able to do it? If not certain, like if I'm working in a fintech sector, does RBI have certain mandate to regulate these kind of space? So if I just have to take fintech influencers, right? Influencers, for example, SEBI is already doing a lot of stuff when it comes to influencers. RBI is doing a lot of stuff to stop misinformation, right? RBI Kehta and campaigns like that. So are we having alternate mechanisms to stop what we are trying to stop? This is something we should look at. Number four, of course, uh, we are talking about IDC, expansion of the powers of IDCs, talking about accountability. Maybe government can put down some more thought that how IDC itself can be made more accountable, because in this digital economy space, right, trust and assurance is something that will give you business. So I'll talk really business out here. So if a platform A can show that I win your trust and I can give you assurance that these are the things that I provide you, it is privacy preserved, safe, it's safe and secure, and we have all cybersecurity controls in place. Probably as a customer, I will go more to that platform rather than somebody else, right? So from those perspective, what should be those technical benchmarks or safeguards that a platform can adopt from or maybe can give guidance on those sort of matters that which actually helps platform do business in the country. I think those should be some practical approaches to find out the solution to our problems, right? Because not everybody is into those kind of a business which is harming users or harming national economy as a whole, or not everybody is pushing those sort of content which is harmful. So from that perspective, I think some sort of guidance directly coming from ministry, that as certain did in the case of mythos, that would be more helpful than coming for a regulation that you don't have to do this, rather you should do this, should be the approach when it comes to curbing the menaces of our digital platforms and whatever harms that they can cause. And of course, regulatory, not harmonization, but at least a regulatory consultation approach, or at least look at the neighborhood, what is happening. That should be the right approach, I think. So, like, our views are really personal, but as DSI, these are our kind of things that we usually say that we have to have a holistic picture when it comes to regulation or talking about developmental policies, but also talking about crime prevention, user safety, accountability. We need to come as a whole as a society, because in our digital space, I don't think ki synthetically generated content, because if Indranil was right, SGI when it is there out there, it has some harms, but it also has some utilities. We have seen how it is being used for education, health. So we have to protect that utility part of it, taking control of whatever harms it can cause, and thereby have a balanced view. Like take them all together, I think should be the approach. And government should talk to each other both at central level, state level, and regulators should of course talk to each other quite often so that we don't have duplicacy of efforts. And second, when he said, right, if you do A, you might be in a problem. If you do B, you might be in a problem. So what should I actually do? There should be some guidance from that perspective rather than what should I not do. So I think, yeah, these would be my some interventions, and trust and assurance as a output for the society at large, both from the platforms, both from the publishers, non-publishers, should be like way forward going ahead in this digital era.
Thank you, Deepa. I'll go to Vartika. Vartika, your thoughts on this?
Yes, thanks, Amrita. I think very good session, first of all. Since I was the first speaker, got to hear everyone later and, really kind of, wriggled my brain as to, what depth there is. And, there are so many things to think about. But just to keep it short, Amrita, I think three things that, we would be seeking. One is clarity, the other is consistency, and the third is implementation. So clarity, we understand the intent is very good, okay. But let's take an example, if one of the platform's intermediaries, they're not able to trace a user, or they're not able to, give you data in time, will they lose safe harbor? Will they be kind of thrown out? Is that the intention? And will that solve the problem? You trying to, catch a miscreant. If somebody, one of the platforms is not able to help you do that, you penalize them, you do all sorts of things. Is that going to solve the problem? Is something that, you know, the problem that arises with this kind of rigid regulation that the government wants to come out. Okay, so I think clarity in terms of what your intention is. We agree intention is good, but clarity of how do you want to implement that? How do you actually want it to be practically performed by all the stakeholders, all the players in the market? Consistency, obviously, everybody's talked so much about the legality of all these legal instruments. I'm not going to repeat it, but yes, anything that you do, we'll tell the government, please, because if advisory as a whole in the Indian legal system is kind of looked at as an advisory, how can just, one ministry or one department go and say, no, it will have a legal binding? Okay, so please have consistency with the law. Please have consistency with the own IT Act, that has a parliament assent that you are kind of taking as a Bible while issuing all these amendments. And I think implementation, I really liked, this is gone, that example of, somebody sharing a synthetically generated, video or whatever, one to one. How do you catch that person? How do you ensure that even that is not done? I don't know whether the intention of the government is really to stop doing that. We've reached a level where everybody's using AI, everybody's using so many tools. I don't know what you can stop, what you cannot stop. So I'm assuming that the intention of the government is actually to stop miscreants and to stop people who create these problems. But I think it requires a really deep and detailed discussion with all kinds of stakeholders. It can't just be that you issue an amendment one day, you have two, three consultations, and then you are out and you can issue a final rule or amendment to the rule and say now you will start implementing it. I think these are issues which require deep conversations. Look at all the pros, look at all the cons, look at all the businesses, look at the country as a whole. Everybody's talked about it. If I do it, what is the end outcome? Am I going to restrict investors? Am I going to create a environment where people are afraid of innovating or doing something new and trying to come out with a new product? I think these are deeper questions that need to be discussed, that need to be deliberated upon before any such amendment is issued. And consultation doesn't mean a half an hour consultation. It really requires a deep discussion, and looking at all the prospects. So I think that is what our submission is going to be, Amrita. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vartika. And I think the other thing from a user perspective is, where is my freedom of speech while I don't want to hurt others? And what may seem, I would say, not right for someone may be okay with many people. So who decides? And I think the checks and balances of how any decision is being taken is also important.
Just one thing. Making exceptions as rules, that's the point. There are so many individuals doing, such good work. Don't just spoil everything by making such kind of rules, is what I would want to end with. Thanks, Amrita.
Thanks. Snehashish, over to you.
No, thanks, Amrita. And I'll just touch upon the whole data retention piece, and because I think that's quite relevant here. Couple of things. So I think there is some level of harmonization which exists between DPDP Act and the IT Act on this. And yes, if you go to 12.3 of the DPDP Act, there is actually language which suggests that there could be instances where data retention may be mandated beyond the right to erasure or right to deletion. So that does exist, but I'll particularly call out the problem with 3.1G and 3.1H. I don't think it's a problem of harmonization per se, but it is more of a problem of finding the right provision under the law to make rules. So if you look at section 67C, it does provide the government the power to make rules on data preservation. And that seems to be a genuine concern or an issue for the government to consider. And the root cause of this problem is, of course, 3.1D. So if a law enforcement agency, and it could be any law enforcement agency or any appropriate government who is empowered to send a 3.1D, sends a notice and the intermediary takes it down within 3 hours, then when there is another request for data on that particular piece of content, then that is not available because that has been removed or deleted already. And the same goes for someone deleting their account as well. so it's a concern when it comes to law enforcement investigations for sure, but this needs to be solved in a manner which works and is not limited to an obligation on an intermediary, but actual rules need to be drafted out under section 767C. There was an attempt to do this a long time ago, but I think that should be the approach rather than trying to force fit this within the intermediary guidelines or the IT rules.
Thanks so much, Snehashish. We do have a question. Anyone in the audience, if you have any questions, queries for the speakers, or you have your comments, please raise your hand. We do have a question from Barkha. In the present era of frequent amendments in tech, how can India ensure speed in regulation without compromising on consultation, security, and accountability? What we should actually look or work on to make the balance? Anyone wants to take the question?
Amrita, if it's okay, I can go.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I'm going to pretty much repeat what I said earlier, that one needs to think through co-regulation because there are not concerns, but there is a lot of skepticism when it comes to self-regulation and whether companies or private sector will actually follow self-regulation and how to implement and enforce. But what actually seems to work or seems to have some efficacy where the government is actually setting down the broad principles or the broad framework and or broad rules of engagement and under which companies are working with government to figure out the solutions, so on and so forth. So in that sense, co-regulation could be a way forward where both stakeholders have a say. And of course, civil society should continue to be a voice on the table as well, and ensuring accountability as these processes take shape.
Thanks, Snehashish. But again, there has to be transparency between all stakeholders, right, when these happen, because many times things are kind of a bit siloed.
Amrita, can I come in here?
Yes.
I think I don't entirely also agree with the premise of the question that Barkha's put, is that, speedy regulation, agreed, but do we really need speed? At times it may be good to pause. And I think something that Vartika mentioned in her second round, and I think we need to underscore that, is that how consultation should be done, deep discussions, etc. And to add to what she also said, where is the data? Always interrogate the data and gather the data and your research before you come to a conclusion. Like, for example, if somebody says, oh, we need to do this very fast because there is a law and order problem, can we take a look at what kind of law and order problem actually took place, both quantitatively and qualitatively? And those methodologies and mechanisms and that data is available. We just have to look at it and say, is this really the issue that you were trying to address? Because if the data is not backing what you're saying, then maybe we are trying to solve the wrong problem with intended and unintended consequences, which will have a lot of problems. The second part is that let's look at the speed of regulation. 2008, we amended the IT Act. 70 we added a clause saying that there should be a nodal agency for critical information infrastructure called NCIIPC. How long did it take NCIIPC to actually be set up and come? Almost 5-6 years before it came up. In 2017, the Supreme Court said, yes, privacy is a fundamental right. The DPDP Act actually got passed only around December 2023. Again, it took a lot of time. And then in 13 November 2025, the rules were passed. And we still have given another 18 months or so. So the question here is that when the government needs it, it takes time to deliberate, etc. So why do you need speedy regulation when you have so much of data available? Let's do those studies, let's do the research, and then come to well-informed decision making.
Thank you, Saket. Anyone from the audience has any questions to be asked? Please feel free to ask. We would want more discussion in case you agree, you disagree. I guess that, yeah, I don't think anyone has any questions today. And we would obviously, in case there are no questions, perhaps, I would ask all panelists to share your final thoughts, one-liner or two-liner, anything you wish to add at the end. Saikat, I'll go with you since I can see you in the screen.
No, I think what I just said were my final thoughts, so I'll just let it be.
Okay. Vartika?
Same, Amrita. I think it's a deeper issue. We need to, we can't just hurry up on this. And if we can convey, all of us in some way or the other can convey this message to the government, I think, it that will be the best job that all of us can do. So yes, thank you.
Thanks so much. Deepa?
I also don't think I have to add too much to it. I think, as I said earlier also, we have to wait and see that how this technology is evolving and find a technology way only to curb the problems that we are facing right now.
Thanks. Snehashish, any last points?
No, nothing further to add, uh, but one thing which I would call out is that we are finally seeing the cracks in overfitting or force fitting a lot of the things within IT rules, and some of these things need to be looked at separate, distinct, or discrete pieces, and different approaches need to be taken to solve for them, and not necessarily regulation will work for it, as Saikat was saying. Speedy regulation may not work. Yes, that's true, but there is a need to find solutions, and that should be the focus. Because if you're talking about standard operating procedures and codes of practice, uh, SOP is basically very procedural. It's not substantive regulation which you're talking about, but what are the steps need to be followed to do XYZ, or so on and so forth. And if those are the issues which needs to be figured out, I think that requires more working on solutions as opposed to regulations. Binding, non-binding, that's a different conversation.
Right.
But I think right now the focus should be to move towards solutions.
And Amrita, if I may just add, like if I just have to talk and limit my interventions to IT Act, clarity is what we will look out for, because we know when any law goes into the court scrutiny, even for words or for simple phrases, courts have nulled down the matters or declared the legislation null and void, right? So from that perspective, we have to be very clear that the language that we are talking and the intent that we are vouching, are they in sync or not? So that our laws that we are making after so much of a consultation whatsoever doesn't fall the scrutiny of the courts.
Thank you so much, Deepa. I think and thank you all for sharing your thoughts. Rajnil has dropped off, I know.
There are two comments in the.
Yes, I did see Neelab's comment. Thanks, Swati. I did see Neelab mentioning that he agrees that there should not be a hurry in imposing new laws without doing studies and research. And even for complying with DPDP Act, 2 years of time is given. We should take similar cautious steps, especially due to the very fast pace of AI development. This will only burden the intermediaries badly. Thanks, Neelab, for this. And thank you so much to all the speakers. What we would be doing internally is try to make at least a note of the key takeaways of what everyone has shared or has been discussed. Our hope is to share it with at least the speakers and others before the submission date, and also submit it with our comments. And we would urge everyone in the call, whoever can, perhaps if you can make your submissions, that would be really helpful in whatever ways you think, because I think just certain people making submissions is not enough. The reason for having these consultations are also to encourage more people to make submission and so that the diverse perspectives come in. And we can also urge MeitY, there is an issue, of course, they want to address, but with more evidence-based research, if they can come up with more nuanced regulations which can be implemented. That would be, I think that is what everyone wants, without stifling innovation, freedom of speech, or overlaps, or creating more burdens for everyone in the chain. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot for being with us for 1.5 hours and sharing your thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amrita.
Thank you, Manthan, everyone. Thanks.